Hey everyone, and welcome to Key Conversations for Leaders. I'm your host, John Ryan, and today we have a very special guest, Gregg Vanourek. Gregg is a leadership developer, executive, and award-winning author delivering training, speaking, coaching, consulting on leadership, life, and work design. Gregg currently runs Gregg Vanourek LLC, a training and development venture, and was previously a tech exec at K12 Incorporated, now a market leader with $1 billion in sales. Gregg is a co-author of 3 influential books including Life Entrepreneurs, Triple Crown Leadership, and his writing has appeared in or been reviewed by Fast Company, BusinessWeek, New York Times, Entrepreneur, Harvard Business Blogs, among many others. He is a graduate of both Yale and the London School of Economics and has a TEDx talk called Discover Mode, Find Your Quest. And today we're very fortunate to have him here on our show. Welcome to the show, Gregg. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the work that you do and looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. And I thank you for the work that you're doing as well. And thank you again for coming on the show. I want to begin by inquiring a little bit about, Triple Crown leadership. What drew you to that specific theme?
Yeah, so Triple Crown Leadership is a book and also a multi-year project that I did with my father, Bob. So he was my co-author on this book, and he's been on a leadership quest his entire career. He was in the Army and startups initially, but then big business and then turnarounds. And then with his influence on my life and others, I've been on a leadership quest that's been more startup focused and work across sectors in business, nonprofits, and governments. And so I got inspired to think about my life and work and the opportunities to influence people through leadership. So we decided to look for great leadership. How can we really get people operating at their best? And we ended up finding through all this research on the world's most admired companies, sustainable companies, innovative companies, 3 things that we wanted to drive for. And it was excellent, ethical, and enduring. And so those were kind of the quest, the ultimate aims of leadership, right? And through our interviews and our research. And we were looking for a metaphor for how to describe the 3 E's that I just mentioned. And we're having conversations with people, it was like a hat trick, it was trio, troika. And somebody said, what about the Triple Crown of thoroughbred horse racing? And we said, oh my God, that's perfect. And we really dug into the whole history of horse racing too, and ended up having fun with that metaphor. But it goes back to ultimately Triple Crown leadership. What kind of leadership does it take to build an organization that is 1, excellent, 2, ethical, and 3, enduring? And then the real theme that emerged from this project, John, was what is your leadership quest? So for us, that seems like a really worthy quest to raise our sights about what we can do with our leadership. But what is your quest and what fits for you, with your purpose and your values? And by the way, I guess the last thing I'll say about it is we don't view leadership as about title, position, authority. Leadership is something anyone can do if they choose. And so it's very much about leading from below, leading from above, leading sideways, and creating a culture of leadership. And so it's about changing your mindset about what you can do with your life and work. And that's the quest.
I love it. So that ties directly into your TEDx, right? Discover mode and find your quest. And you clearly have found your quest. And your dad was involved. That's got to be a really exciting thing. When did your relationship on this level with your father, if you don't mind me asking on a personal level, like when did you guys start talking about leadership? Did that grow up from when you were a kid as well?
It's really fun to reflect back. And so my dad had these really high-powered CEO jobs after working his way up. And he became disillusioned with business leadership early on in his career, seeing poor examples. And for example, just this kind of mercenary view of leadership, of sort of treating people to extract value from them, and firing, the whole like M&A and private equity and some models. And he said, "Whoa, is this what I want to do?" And then he came across servant leadership, the work of Robert Greenleaf, and it was just an absolute mind flip for him to think about. Instead of thinking about a leader at the top who tells people what to do and has the status. To say, no, the leader is at the bottom, serving everybody in the organization so that they can add value to customers and the society. And so he engaged in this. And so when my brother and I were growing up, my dad would invite us to the company picnic, or we would go into the office to meet him. And he had a really tough schedule, intense turnarounds. We're kind of picking this up. And early in those years, I was a little bit cynical about business, and I was more interested in nonprofit and government. But then I came around to how leadership can be about inside first. This goes back to an organization, and it can start with purpose and values. And you can really add value to people's lives through business or through nonprofit or through government, and they're all important. And I'm actually interested in working across the sectors and having business have more impact and having nonprofits be more like business with innovation and these kinds of things. So there's a lot of potential there.
Well, it sounds like all of those experiences that you've had and your dad had really came together to form that triple crown, ideology, starting from the inside, being the servant leader, and then the goals and everything else comes and flows from that vision and values that you have. One of the things I know that you talk about in your books and is important to you is social considerations as well as sustainability, which sounds like that ethics and the endurance right there. What can leaders really expect right now? What are they thinking around like social change, social responsibility, and long-term sustainability?
Yeah. When I was in business school, one of the first courses was about business and society. And that's actually really important and interesting because a lot of people view business as separate from society. And you kind of view business is a game that you're supposed to play, that where you're supposed to maximize profits and growth and to maximize shareholder value. And this is actually kind of, you mentioned the word ideology. This is what business schools have been teaching for decades. And so it's actually been very influential. It's the way a lot of leaders view as their role. But of course, this is only one point of view about what business is fundamentally. Some people think it's obvious, it's that simple, period, there's no discussion. But there are competing worldviews about it. And so the whole leading multiple stakeholders is another competing theory where it's not just about shareholders, who are of course important if they're investing and taking a risk and funding, with capital, et cetera. But what about your employees and their experience and their opportunities to develop and grow and be rewarded and recognized and have fun and feel part of a team or a community? What about your customers? Are you adding value, solving problems, are you innovating? What about your partners, your suppliers, and are you helping them? And what about your communities? Are you engaged locally with the schools or volunteering? And what about the world and climate and larger things? And so business, of course, is one piece of these systems. And I think, right now we're talking during a pandemic, and with all of the health strains, but the financial strains and the mental health strains come with it. And it really shows, John Kabat-Zinn said that the moment is the curriculum. And I think one of the things that I've seen clearer than ever is you see how dependent and interdependent we are as systems, and that business can operate, well without government and regulation and nonprofits and societies and families and hospitals and schools, with a lot of parents supporting their kids with remote learning. So it's all connected. And so if you're leading people today, they're going to be asking you about, particularly younger generations, about sustainability questions. What are we doing? Is it responsible? They're going to be asking us about ethical and about impact. Are we engaging? And so there's a lot of people who are looking for some kind of higher purpose. And our customers are going to be asking for that too. And they're willing to pay a premium if we're doing that well and communicating it, but they're also willing to walk away if they see you being irresponsible or not sufficiently woke, not sufficiently dialed in to these opportunities. It's also a business opportunity if you do this well, right? You can add financial value and social impact and get that engine revving, but it's not obvious. It doesn't happen automatically.
And it sounds like they're no longer mutually exclusive, where you have to focus on the financial stakeholder returns when you can actually think about really, shareholder returns versus stakeholder returns, that you're really thinking about the impact on everyone locally and can even be globally in some contexts as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the more you actually think about adding value to the different stakeholders, the more powerful the overall business model can become because it gives you room and margin, right? But it's a long-term play. If you're talking about just this quarter or this month, I mean, clearly cut costs, drive sales, over promise, don't meet the expectations that you've set out with your sales team and these kinds of things, under deliver. But that's going to come back to bite you in the medium and the long term because you're going to be reducing trust. You're going to be losing people. You have to rehire and retrain. And so it takes you into this tension between the short term and the long term. But you also have to get away from the thinking of trade-offs. It's either this or this. That's like the simplistic way to view it. And often with innovation, we can do both. We can sort of change the frame and have the short term and the long term, have the excellent and the ethical.
So to do that, then you have to be clear on your values. So what's important to you as an organization, who you are concerned about, and then challenge those constraints under which you're operating. Otherwise, you're going to stay in the same lane and not really going to redefine the game that you're playing.
That's right. And so going back to this metaphor of Triple Crown leadership, what kind of leadership does it take to build something that's excellent, ethical, and enduring? We developed from all that research and our own experience. And we did interviews with 61 organizations in 11 countries, Google, Spotify, all sorts of Cisco, GE, big, small, high-tech, low-tech, business, nonprofit. We developed 5 advanced leadership practices for how to do that. And one of the key ones is what we call the colors. And it's a horse racing metaphor for purpose, values, and vision. And so, I think a lot of companies these days have a mission statement or a vision statement, but they do it very poorly. They're very, it's a paper exercise and they don't live up to it. And so if you do it that way, it's actually very dangerous because the people in your organization are going to see, we just wasted, weekends at retreats, taught wordsmithing, vision statements and values. And here I see my manager is time after time not living up to it and nobody is pushing back. And so they become very cynical. And so I think it's dangerous to even do that stuff unless you're committed to doing it really well. And the way to do it really well is to do it collaboratively, is to elicit shared purpose, shared values, shared vision. And that's another thing, by the way, a lot of people confuse these terms and they're not clear. And then you have to inculcate it into the culture of the whole enterprise, the division, your team, and connect people's personal purpose, values, and vision with the organization. And you have to communicate it over and over, and you have to have accountability mechanisms. And that's where we get into the 5th practice of aligning around these things. It starts with purpose, values, and vision, but then you have to align to it.
Where does the idea of a culture of character come into play? And can you talk a little bit about what that is?
Yeah. So to step back, a lot of people maybe don't reflect on how important character is in leadership, in life. If you think about families or anything, if you're involved in a school committee or PTO, character is fundamental to what people look for in a parent, in a friend, in a colleague, certainly in a leader. And now in this world where we've got such a breakdown of trust, where you see so many people saying one thing, doing another, over promising, under delivering, not living up to, or their actions, don't align. And so, Warren Bennis, the leadership guru who wrote On Becoming a Leader, he said integrity is the most essential aspect of leadership. All the studies and stuff that he did. Warren Buffett talks about, he looks for intelligence, he looks for integrity, he looks for energy. But he says, if you don't have integrity, the other two get you in trouble. And so first pausing on, the 3 E's, excellent, ethical, enduring. Ethics is an imperative. we must meet our ethical obligations. And so a lot of organizations and leaders aren't committed to that explicitly, right? And so that's the character piece. But then you want to build, to your question, you want to build a culture of that. And so you want to, own the shared values, and then again, actually use them in decision making. And so where it gets very tactical, Zappos, for example, is an interesting example. So this is it was an online shoe retailer. It was a startup that grew to $1 billion, was acquired by Amazon, and it's grown to other things. When they're doing performance reviews, 50% of the review is, how did you do in your performance, your work performance, whatever it is, customer service, quality indicators, revenue growth, whatever. The other 50% is, what did you do to uphold our company values and to make contributions to our company culture? And so then if it's 50% of your review, it's got teeth, right? People it's not just something on the wall. I'm going to have to go answer for this every quarter when I meet with my manager. We're going to have conversations about specifically, what did I do? I have to make a case here, and we have to improve this over time. So you actually want to actualize it. And when you do that, it's very powerful, because people see, wow, we share values. We're part of a family that's working towards business goals, but also we have shared values that really connect.
That makes so much sense. And I love that example of Zappos and the 50-50 split in there. Because I think what I hear you saying is that there's almost like a beginning of that journey, the hero's journey you're about to go on. Hey, this is going to be, it has to be a serious deal. Might as well not even do it if we're not going to uphold that. Because the two deficits are that if you as a manager are not upholding the values, well, that reduces the integrity and creates cynicism, like you said. But it also, as an organization, reduces the integrity overall, because now we're not living by our stated purpose. So it can't just be an exercise in checking off a box. It has to be a commitment. And how do you operationalize that? Sounds like the feedback reviews, hopefully more than once a year, of course, are actually one way to do that.
Yeah, I think that's right. And just a couple other quick things. I mean, one of the good ways that we've seen where companies and organizations actualize this is they don't just have a word for their values. They have a word with an explanation that they really describe what specifically they mean by it. And then you can go further and say, what are the behaviors? And you've got bullet points of like 3 to 5 behaviors for every value. And so then when you go into review, you're not just talking about integrity, you're not just in the abstract, or you're not just talking about quality. You're saying, okay, bullet point 1, what did you do to uphold the commitments you made to customers? Okay, bullet point number 2. So it gives it much more specificity and concreteness. And the other thing I'll say is that, back to the trust piece, a lot of people view the ethical stuff as like, oh, well, that sounds nice and abstract and philosophical, but this is the real world, John. We gotta meet our numbers, and I'm under pressure. And that's true, but if you don't have the ethical imperative, you literally erode your ability to drive business value and performance over time. So it literally will work against your, some of the imperatives that you have in terms of your results imperatives, because people will leave, customers will, not trust you with their business anymore, suppliers won't work with you anymore. And so, but if you do it well, you build a trust bank account that actually shows up in your bottom line, as well as in the experience that customers and employees have of affiliating with you.
I think that's a really good point, especially in today's, digital age where a customer experience goes online and it's not one-to-one anymore, it's one-to-many, and that reputation is everything. All we really have is our values and our words. I really loved your point about operationalizing it in terms of like, here's the value of integrity. Well, okay, well, what does that mean? Here's a description. What does that look like? And looking at it in every sense of the word so that there's no ambiguity there. Because if you and I are in a meeting, you have a word, a definition in your mind about what integrity is, and I have a definition, and they're probably very, very different. Does this concept of, operationalizing, actualizing what it looks like to have integrity and the values as an example, does it also come into hiring? I know you talk about the heart characteristics, And when they're hiring, are they asking people to, describe a time then when you fulfill these values, or can they allow that person to grow into that role?
Yeah, hiring is really critical. And back to our 5 advanced leadership practices for the Triple Crown. It's the first one, starts with what we call head and heart. And this is where a lot of leaders make mistakes. Typically, what we do in hiring, if you think about an interview, you get the resume and you're asking questions about their work experiences, their knowledge, their skills. Where did you go to school? What did you study? What have you done tactically to add value? And those are, of course, important, your competence. But the problem is it doesn't stop there. And Google has done a ton of research on this of what makes, at Google, you've got to be really smart to work there. It's incredibly difficult to get hired at Google in terms of the selectivity. It's way beyond the selectivity of Harvard University and others in terms of the actual numbers. And they figured out that the people who really thrive and add value at Google versus sort of the normal Googlers, it's really at the bottom of the resume that very few people ask about, which is those interests and skills and those personal aspects of, did you do, the Peace Corps? Have you traveled around the world? Did you do, some kind of, neighborhood Olympics when you were a kid? And that's the heart piece. And so what people fail to address enough, you want the head piece too, but the heart piece starts with character, like we were just talking about, right? Because the trust factor, you're talking about courage. Are people willing to step up and have the tough conversations? You're talking about emotional intelligence. You're talking about their resilience in a setback. You're talking about their hunger to do great work, their drive, and so those heart characteristics, we want to hire for them in addition to the head stuff, but we also want to develop them. You can develop emotional intelligence. You can develop ethical prowess, and you want to reward people for the heart stuff too, and not just for, did I meet my numbers this quarter, right? And if you do that, again, it starts to inculcate the shared values and the culture of character, as well as results that we were talking about earlier.
When I hear you mention those words, the heart characteristics there, as leaders, business owners, executives, we're the stewards of the organizations that we're involved with. At the same time, the idea of resilience, it connects back to entrepreneurialism. And can you talk about a little bit about the life entrepreneurship ideas that you have from the earlier book as well? I know we talked about Triple Crown leadership, but bring in some of those concepts and tell us what that's about too.
Yeah, so the Life Entrepreneurs Project is another multi-year project that I co-authored, in this case with Christopher Gergen, who is a really dynamic social entrepreneur and a friend of mine, former colleague at that startup that you mentioned earlier. And so we had this observation that we had a bunch of questions in our life in kind of a transition of kind of, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going in life? What should I do with the rest of my life? And we noticed that this was sort of early in our career, and we noticed that a lot of our friends and family and colleagues were also wrestling with these questions. And then people at midlife come back to this question, people in sort of the retirement zone. So these questions never go away. And so the Life Entrepreneurs piece is really about, how do I integrate my life and work with purpose and passion? So it's not about being a lifelong entrepreneur. It's about entrepreneuring our lives, our whole lives, work, family, life, education, fun, play, all these things, so that they're integrated and that they're a whole. And I find a lot of people are compartmentalizing these things, or a lot of people are so focused on one that they drop the other balls in ways that they really come to regret. And what we really want is the whole package. How can we thrive in all of our chosen endeavors? And so the entrepreneur piece is, an entrepreneur has ownership. They take agencies. I am responsible, right? And then they innovate, and it's an adventure, and they have vision, and they're really resourceful. And so you put it together. So for that book, we interviewed 55 people around the world, who most of whom are business entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs, And some of them, like Starbucks or Cliff Bar, or, these kinds of things. But they integrate their life and work in ways that are really personal according to their values and what they want, and their vision of the good life, as we talk about. And so this is something I'm on the quest to be a life entrepreneur. I'm a parent with young kids and, working, starting a business, moved back from Europe last year. And, we're all going through these challenges, and how do we design our lives and our work intentionally as a life entrepreneur?
It brings up the idea of intentionality and flow, right? So when you're myopic on that vision, the purpose, and you're getting rid of all the noise that's out there, and I know you've also written about this, what does an organization that's in flow look like? We talk in our society about people being in the flow personally, but can an organization be in the flow, and what does that look like?
Yeah, it can. And so a lot of people don't realize, we think of flow, and the great research from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi at Claremont Graduate University is incredibly interesting studies over decades with him and his colleagues, where they surveyed and they observed, chess masters and jazz musicians and artists, and the flow moments. And, flow, just to be clear, is a state of being completely absorbed in an activity. And that's why we have the sense of kind of losing time, right? Because and they called it flow because it feels like you're being carried along by a current of water, right? Because you're so, you lose separation from you and the activity, and you're so sort of in there, and there's sort of conditions of flow. So most people, to your point, think about it as an individual thing. They think about Michael Jordan or LeBron or whatever, but the research found that it can be a group, a team phenomenon, as well as an organizational phenomenon, but it's very, very difficult. And what we found in our research is that most teams and most organizations are dysfunctional. They're not clear, they're not coherent, they're not willing to have those crucial conversations where somebody raises their hand and takes the risks and says, wait a minute, I've got some concerns about this. Like, can you tell me more about this? And part of it goes back to lack of clarity on purpose, values, vision, as well as the more medium and short-term things, and poor communication. And then you end up in a situation where people are actually not aligned and in flow, but working actually cross purposes. And I've seen this in organizations where people are sabotaging each other or undermining, and it's about ego and it's about politics. I think this is very, very common. And so the alignment towards flow is a disciplined process of aligning the long, medium, and short term across the whole enterprise, the departments in it, and the divisions, and the teams and the individuals, so that it all sort of lines up. And we, in our book, we've got a 10-step process for doing that. There are different models. Patrick Lencioni has kind of a 7-step model that's really excellent. Startups might want to use an even simpler model because they're not ready for the 10-step model. It doesn't matter so much the model you choose or the framework. It matters much more, do you have a disciplined process to keep checking in, gathering data, making pivots, getting feedback, making adjustments, communicating, and dialing in that alignment. And if you do, you can achieve flow sometimes. But most people, come nowhere near it.
And of course, it begins with developing an awareness that something isn't working, that we're off track here, and hopefully someone can have their wits about them and they can take a step back and look at, hey, like you said, something's not right here. What do you suggest to leaders where they're suspecting that they're not in flow and that things are maybe headed for a breakdown in the organization?
Yeah. So one of the critical tasks of a leader, I think, is to really keep your eye on the whole business and the big picture. We interviewed Billy Shore for Life Entrepreneurs. He's a social entrepreneur behind Share Our Strength, which is an anti-poverty, anti-hunger organization that he and his sister run that's been very innovative and very successful with the business model as a nonprofit. And he says that as leaders, all of the incentives in an organization run towards the short term. It's like putting out a fire, meeting our monthly target, the quarterly report, and this thing. And he says, if someone doesn't keep their eye on the horizon, I don't know what the job of a leader is if it's not to sort of be a steward of that vision, that higher purpose over time. And obviously, you need to balance the short term and the long term. And so, Ron Heifetz at Harvard University is a great leadership guru. And he's got this metaphor for leaders that to me has been very helpful. He says, you have to be able to get on the balcony as a leader and observe what's happening. And he says, often we're in the dance, we're on the dance floor, and you're having a meeting, and there's egos engaging, and there's pressure, and there's kind of tension around stuff. And you have to, of course, engage in that during the meeting. You're probably facilitating the meeting. But you also have to have this meta skill to, while you're in the meeting, to rise up to the balcony and observe what's happening here. Why is this person getting upset? What's going on? Is there a root cause? Why do we keep having this breakdown? And to be able to observe it while you're in the dance. And that's a meta skill. We've got to lead ourselves. We need to have renewal practices where we get good sleep, and we have perspective. We're dialed into a higher purpose. We move our bodies. We are integrated people who have commitments to our family or our community, these kinds of things. And it's about that perspective, so that you don't lose sight of the quest, right? And seeing the potential in the people around you.
So we get pulled into that short-term mindset, and it's easy to get sucked into that, right? Short-term games, like even eating food or drinking something or going on social media versus doing your work, there's rewards that happen neurochemically all the time. Any tips or suggestions to help people kind of interrupt that pattern to go back into that meta state, the bigger picture, and look for the pattern rather than getting sucked into the old patterns that they've had?
Yeah, lots of things that we can do. And so one is to calendarize reflection. We can be unintentional and lose our agency by the email inbox and the series of meetings, and then you're just reacting, right? But a leader's got to step up their game and say, I need to preserve time to think, time to reflect, right? And so that can be every week. You can calendarize it, but then you also need like a monthly check-in, a quarterly thing, the annual thing. You need to build it into the rhythm, because otherwise it gets lost. I think mentors and coaches are really important to this, because sometimes it can feel lonely or it can feel hopeless, and so having an objective person who doesn't have a horse in the race, and they just have your best interest in mind. They can view it objectively. They can ask you tough questions. And then doing what we talked about earlier, which is building this culture of character and of stewardship, where it's not about the leader being the steward of the quest to be excellent, ethical, enduring, and just fighting for the purpose, values, and vision. It's about unleashing everybody in the organization to lead and to innovate and to own the purpose, values, and the vision. And when you do that, it changes everything. And so the leader doesn't have to be the only one that Billy Shore was talking about to look to the horizon. Everybody's going to say, I've got my job description, which is, I'm doing IT, and I'm building firewalls, or, I'm working on the servers, or the landing pages, or I'm doing HR. So everybody's got their job, but they've also got a second job, which is, I am a steward of our purpose, values, and vision. And I am responsible too for asking questions about the ethics, the excellent and the enduring. And so then you build it into the conversations, you build it into the meetings, you build it into the workflow, where everybody has that ownership of it in the agency. So again, get over yourself as a leader. It can't be you solving it and being the one who heroically fixes it or comes up with the vision. It's about unleashing the potential around you. And that's very powerful. People want to go work for places that where people can be that invested and have that much ownership to innovate and to do great work.
So shifting to that identity that I am the steward of the organizational purpose, values, and mission, it's not just the leaders and executive team that have to have that inside. It sounds like everyone. Do you think that that's some of the key to success for like some of the great customer service leaders in the world, like Disney, Marriott, and companies like that? Is that what they're doing? Is like everyone is embodying these concepts?
I think that's a really big part of it. I think often with leadership, we talk about delegation. I'm going to delegate authority to you on this project within a certain budget. We say, that's fine, that's a step in the right direction, but it's not nearly enough. And so then people say, well, let's go to empowering people. And so I'm empowered on a project. And we say, well, that's great. People want to have power. The problem with those is you can disempower and you can undelegate. And so we prefer to take it even further, which is back to that sort of unleash, right? Which is like if you've done a good job on the front end of hiring people with character, with emotional intelligence, with courage, with who are fiercely excited about growing and development, as well as the head skills, you can unleash them and then you can trust them. Obviously, sometimes people will make mistakes, and then you sort of come back and you work on it. But I think there's a lot of great examples where instead of having this overlay of a lack of trust and kind of regulation and policies, where people feel like cogs in a machine, like, my God, I'm a grown person, like I can make a judgment call. If it's the reverse, and the leaders say, we trust you, you got this. That's why we brought you in. Just go, and make good judgment calls, and come back and we'll talk about it if we have problems. People love that. And then they're going to innovate because they're the ones who are dialed in to the customer, call center and the real problems, or their area, if they're, doing the operational efficiency thing. They're the ones who have the knowledge about what the real issues are, the people. And so it can be very, very powerful for people as a motivating experience, as an employee value proposition, as well as the performance. I mean, you add that up, it's a multiplier.
I'm so glad you brought up employee value proposition, because it really is a buzzword these days that's really popular, because the world is changing and people are really demanding a culture that is a work-life integration, like you mentioned, that's ESG, environmental, social, and governance is changing too. All the way back to your initial conversation, which I agree. When I learned in business school, it was the purpose of a company is to maximize stockholder value. And it's just not true anymore. I think people don't want to be a part of that. Is there a difference? And obviously, I can imagine that startups are changing faster than maybe some of the more established companies that are out there. Is there a difference from a leadership perspective? I know you've had experience in working with and being a part of both. Is there a difference in leadership between the startup mentality and a more established firm?
Yes, there is. And the biggest startup experience I've had, and I've had several, was a scale up, which was an online education venture that we built from scratch. We were able to raise a lot of money and become the market leader in a short period of time. And in 4 years, scale up from 5 people to hundreds of employees, $65 million in sales, on our way to an IPO. And then it went on to become $1 billion company after I left, and has gone international. But we almost ran out of cash a couple of times. We made some huge mistakes on that sort of roller coaster. And so, the startup context is very different from a traditional, corporate or whatnot. I like to think of 4 things. The time pressure is really intense. They're resource constrained. You don't have, policies and procedures and a lot of people and capital typically. There's a lot of uncertainty. You have kind of like, what's going to work? There's no field manual for your business model or your product launch. And they tend to be very chaotic because, you haven't had the time, to kind of put it all together. At the beginning, it takes time. And so that's it's one of the most challenging leadership contexts you can have, along with turnarounds. And so given that, I think leaders need to be really nimble. And so I really like the whole lean startup methodology, which is, it's not just for startups, by the way. It's very much an innovation methodology it's designed for big companies and governments too, but it comes out of startup experience. And it's really about, as a startup, cash is king, right? You run out of cash, you're dead. And it's a very high risk. And the old model was, I've got an idea, I'm going to write a business plan, I'm going to launch it, and then I fail, 90% of the time. And lean startup is about, nobody's that smart to be able to guess with all the variables of the market. And so what you have to do is you have to do these minimum viable product, MVP launches, pilots, prototypes, and gather feedback. And so what lean startup is really about learning. It's about the learn startup. Is how do you go through a feedback loop and quickly learn about what will actually get traction in the marketplace and not what you think. And so that's one of the key things where you have to build an organization that's really good at testing, experimenting, and learning. The other classic leadership mistake in startup land is that people don't pay attention to building the culture. There's so many challenges going on with cash and product launch and whatever PR. There's so many fires that you neglect the culture of the venture. And then you end up often with a mediocre or bad or toxic culture. And it ends up killing you in the long term. And so then that's why, there's a lot of, there's a metaphor of if you're coding something, you have technical debt. It's all the compromises that you make in your code. Just you're going to go fix it later. And the same concept from Steve Blank says you have organizational debt or culture debt. It's all the little compromises or the things that you neglected because you were so focused on putting out fires that later turn out to be a disaster. And you see people are leaving in droves, or there's a revolt against your new compensation policy because you didn't take the time to invest in the people. And you know what? The people are always the most important thing. The work is through the people, as Heifetz said. And so we can never be in a situation where we're focusing so much on strategy or product or business model that we're neglecting the people. The people are the ones who do all of that. It's all through them. So never neglect the people, the relationships, the conversations.
I wanted to ask about conversations because clearly, as a consultant, author, speaker, traveling around the world and speaking to people virtually like this, you've had a lot of conversations with people from all walks of life. What has been, one of the more impactful or profound conversations that you've had, either personally or professionally, that's impacted you and where you are today?
Yeah. So for me, I go back to my college years and a college philosophy professor who asked, how has the world changed? And in a way, and got us thinking about the last 50 years, the last 100 years. And we had a conversation about it where he got so intense, he cared so much about pulling us into this conversation that it sort of gave me permission to care too, and for a light to switch on, and for me to really apply myself on these questions. And that led me to the questions about, I took a course called Theories of the Good Life. And, what does it mean to live a good life? And, and that took me into that land of like, well, what does it mean to live a good life? And what have other people said? And what do I think? And I always keep coming back to that because I think as leaders, we often get stuck in this sort of, our identity is wrapped up in leading our team or our organization and whatnot. And that's really hard, as you well know. But the precursor to that, the foundation to that is I need to lead myself first. And if I don't do that well, I'm not going to be able to do this other thing sustainably over time. And people are going to see that they're sort of rotten at the core, or there's some fundamental character things, or way out of balance, or frenetic. And so what I'm focused on is helping people lead themselves, and so they can lead others, and then we can lead change in the world. With our transformation of the organization, or more social impact and sustainability, as well as high performance. And all of those things need to align. You can't do just the middle one without this one, and you're never going to get here to the third one without, and so we need to be able to do all of them. And that's what the world needs of us now. There's so many big challenges, in our marketplaces and in the world. They're great opportunities, but this is what the world needs.
What a great question from your philosophy professor, and to guide you into your philosophy right now in life, leading yourself, leading others, and leading change. Gregg, I want to thank you so much for being here. What is the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you and find out more and learn from you as well?
Yeah. So, well, thanks for asking that. There are a few ways. And so I've got a website, greggvanourek.com. And so it's Gregg with two G's and then VANOUREK.com. And with our Triple Crown Leadership book, we also have a website for that, which is triplecrownleadership.com. And on both of those websites, we have a ton of free resources for leaders, relating to leading self, leading others, entrepreneurship, social impact, conscious capitalism, these kinds of things. And then I'm also, I've got a YouTube page, but I'm also active on Twitter. And I think there's a lot of value that I see. I really learn a lot from people on Twitter with conversations. And so at G Vanourek on Twitter. So those are good places to start.
Excellent. I'll make sure I have all those links in the show notes as well. And I want to thank you again for being here. Thanks so much.
Thank you, John. Cheers.
And for all of you listening and watching, until next time, develop yourself, empower others, and lead by example.